Let's see where we got up to. I have a lot of diagrams here. This isn't the easiest part of Masechet Yevamot. Okay. So according to my calculation, we're here on Daf Sariches, and we should be on the bottom of Amud Aleph. Let's see if I'm right. Yeah. So we'll start with Tashma, which we began yesterday. And that's 3 lines before. Wait, just 1 second. I think maybe we got a little bit further. Maybe. Did we turn to Tzadiches Amud Beis already? I'm trying to remember. 1 second. Anybody remember exactly where we stopped? For some reason whatever. It's if nobody objects, we'll start with Tashma again on the bottom of Tzadiches Amud Aleph. We may be reviewing some of what we know, but that's fine. So ger shahaya leidaso b'keducha v'araso shelo b'keducha yesh lo she'er aim. So there's a kirva, there's a relationship through his mother, which is going to generate an Isur Erva regarding his brother's wife. That's called she'er aim. So since his mother, or I should say the 2 brothers, their mother, Their, their mother underwent gerus before she gave birth, therefore they are considered brothers, and they are maternal brothers. When one of them dies and he leaves a wife behind, the other one is enjoined from marrying his brother's wife. But ein lo she'er ah. Even if we were to assume that they were brothers from the same father and they came from 2 different mothers, again, we'll have to see whether the father underwent gerus or not. But let's assume right now that he's not Jewish, and we'll see the second part of the Bryce in a minute. Then there's no such thing as she'er ha'av. You cannot view 2 biological brothers from the same father as brothers, according to Allah. We're always going to assume that we don't know who the father is. Esad, Nasa achoso min ha'em, Yotzi. If he married his sister, and it was a sister that was born to his mother, in other words, they both share the same mother, then we're going to force him to divorce her. And even if he married her, let's say before his gerus, once he's a ger, he can no longer remain married to his biological sister from his mother. And we're going to assume now that the mother was miskayeres, that she herself was a gioris. And therefore, if he were to marry his sister, and they both share the same mother, and the mother herself underwent gerus, then that's an Isur Kares of Achosa. And therefore, we have to force him to divorce her. We cannot allow that marriage to continue. However, Min ha'av, if the ger marries his biological sister and they share the same father, and let's assume the father is a guy, Yekayim, then we don't view it as if they're related brother and sister through the same father. We don't know who the father is. As we said before, in the case of Goyim, we cannot identify the father. So that's called Yekayim, meaning he doesn't have to divorce his sister Min ha'av, and it's public knowledge that the halacha does not recognize them as brother and sister, because we don't have to assume that they really are brother and sister. They come from the same father. Now, there's a little bit of a chiddush here because you might have said that he may, allowing him to marry his sister from the same father might lead him or others to marry achoso shenoldo li'aviv mi'isha acheres achar sheniskayer, meaning he's going to think, well, look, you're allowing me to remain married to my sister because we don't share the same mother. Then what would be in a case where if my father was misgayer, he had two different wives, and this is my sister, but not from the same mother, but rather from the same father. Now, in that case, they are sister and brother because the father was misgayer before the hora, whatever it might be. But we're not going to be afraid, in other words, we're not going to institute a gzera that in a case where the father is a guy, we have to bust up the marriage between him and his sister, atu, because of the chash that maybe in a case where the father converted, he might come to the conclusion that we're not sister and brother because we came from two different mothers. It's absolutely clear not only to the individual, but also to the public that since the father is a guy, therefore they're not sister and brother. We don't consider them to have come from the same father. That's because he's a guy. If he was misgayer, then everybody understands that they are brother and sister because they share the same father. Now we go on. Now here's a case where the ger marries his aunt, achos ha'av min ha'em, which means that he and she, second, achos ha'av min ha'em, that his father and this woman came from the same mother. Is once again, we have a relationship of a brother and sister through the same mother. Yotze. In that case, we're going to bust up the marriage because we're talking about achoso mi'imo. Again, in this case that we're dealing with, it was achoso mi'imo before the gerus, before the mother's gerus. But we have to worry about a case of achoso mi'imo after the mother's gerus, which is an erva doraisa of achoso. As we've said many times, and it bears repetition, a man cannot marry his half-sister even if she's the maternal half-sister. But in a case where they were biological brother and sister from the same mother, but the mother was not misgayer, at least not before they were born, then on a doraisa level, she's not achosa, because there's no relationship of kurva to the mother who's a non-Jewish woman, and that's called kikatan shenoladam. But here we're going to institute a gzera, and that's called yotzi, on a drabana level, because we're afraid that if we allow him to marry his sister, I said sister, and I may have said it a few times over. Anyway, I stand corrected. I'm talking about his father's sister. If we allow him to marry his father's sister, whose relationship is purely biological, his father and this woman, and that's because the gerus did not take place before they were born, then we're afraid that he might marry his auntie, his father's sister from the same mother, even in a case where the gerus took place before the brother, his father and his auntie were born. Okay, now we turn to Daf Tzadi Ches Amud. Now, Mina Av Yikayim. If let's assume that his father and his aunt, meaning his father's brother, were born to the same non-Jewish father, then we don't have to worry about it. He's allowed, if there's Geirus, to marry his father's sister, because we don't recognize them as father and sister. Everybody understands that the reason why they're not brother and sister is because the father was a gun. Now we're talking about the auntie who is not the sister of his father, but the sister of his mother. And these two girls were born to the same mother, so they are half sisters, what we call maternal sisters, is Yotzi. Why? Why Yotzi? Why do we have to break up this marriage? Here, remember we said that if a brother and sister share the same mother, then that's an erev d'oraisa of achosa. And now we're going one generation above that to the uncle and the aunt, right? This is brother and sister. They were born to the same mother, and therefore we consider them as achoso mina'em. And that's also be'isur karetz. That's achosa, even though she's only a maternal sister. And here we're talking about a maternal aunt, meaning she is a sister to your father through the same mother, which would be your grandmother. And that's going to be prohibited. We're going to have to break up the marriage because it looks too similar to a case of achoso mina'em. So since the Torah recognized achoso mina'em as an erva, here in the next generation, with regard to the nephew, it's going to be achoso mina'em, and that's considered your father's sister. Next, mina'av. Now we're talking about a case where your father and his sister share the same father. They are paternal brother and sister. Rabbi Meir Omer Yotzi v'Chacham Omer Yekayim. I understand the Chachamim very well. I don't understand Rabbi Meir, because the Chachamim is simply arguing this and applying the same old principle that two siblings, they came from the same father who's not Jewish, are not considered brother and sister or two brothers. And therefore, if this woman is a sister to his mother because they share the same father, his grandfather, they're paternal sisters, then since their sisterhood, if you can pardon that phrase, their achva is mina'em, mina'av, I meant to say, meaning it's a sister to your mother, but through a father, they are paternal sisters, then Chachamim would say Yekayim because everybody knows they're not considered related to each other because they came from a non-Jewish father. So Chachamim Yekayim, there's no gzeira of achos imo if this woman and your mother share the same father, but they don't share the same sister. That's just an application of the rules that we've set up to this point. And now we have to understand the logic of Rabbi Meir that we have to prohibit this relationship and break it up with a get. Rabbi Meir Omer kol erva shehi mishum she'er ha'em yotzi. It doesn't matter whether or not this brother and sister, your uncle and right, your father and your aunt, it doesn't matter that they came from the same mother. And therefore they're not related to each other. No. Once you add this variable into the equation that they're from the same mother, then it's us. Why? Because of achoso mina'em. So in the case of achoso mina'av, in any level, in any generation, then we say we don't know who the father is. And nobody takes this seriously as if they're really siblings. Everybody knows halacha that biological fatherhood amongst goyim has no impact on the yichus once there's gerus. But in the case of achoso min ha'em, and any relationship of kurva that's created by a common mother, then we do apply the principle of an Isur Erva, called Shnios Larais D'Rabbanan, but nevertheless it's us. The Gazru, I'm just reading the Masechet, he says, Mishum Achoso Me'imo. However, Mishum Ha'av Yikayim. Next, Umutar B'Eshes Achiv Me'imo. Oh, this is going to be a problem. So we have here a case of Achiv Me'imo. He's a maternal brother. And he died and he left a wife. You want to marry his wife. So let's understand why this is mutter. Because again, here we're not talking about genetic kurva. We're not talking about relatives that share the same genes. We're talking about a person who married his brother, right? It's his sister-in-law. And in such a case, even though they are brothers that share the same mother, but nevertheless, to add that extra link to the chain through the marriage of his brother, meaning his maternal brother, to a woman, and now you want to say, well, that jacks it up to what? I mean, you can't say that it's like his sister. It's not his sister. It's his brother's wife. So that far we don't go in the Gzeira. Now we have another case where we're going to allow the ger b'nesue eshes achi aviv. So we're talking about his uncle, the brother of his father, who's married to a woman, and the ger is allowed to marry her because kikatan shenoladam. Even though she's married to his uncle, which is called Eshes Achi Aviv, it's mutter. So if I were to quiz you and ask you, when does the halacha permit marrying your aunt who is the sister of your father? The answer is in this case of gerus. I'm sorry. Let me get it again. Scratch that. When will a halacha allow you to marry the sister of your brother? And the answer is in the case of gerus. And the reason for it is because she was married to your brother, but number one, the Torah doesn't recognize these two brothers as brothers. But 1 second, it's achiv me'ima. Second. Right, because achiv me'imo is not a problem here on a doraisa level, because as far as the Torah law is concerned, since they were born before the gerus, they're not related. But we have an Isur based on the fact that had the gerus of the mother taken place before they were born, it would be achotza. Therefore, we have to prohibit even the case where the gerus took place after they were born. But that's only when there's no additional variable of marriage that kicks in. So therefore, if she's your sister from the same mother, even though the mother wasn't Miskaya, we have to worry about a case of confusion with a case where the mother was Miskaya. But in the case of HS Achiv, that's already a Gzera. Why? Because number one, you have to institute a Gzera Atu, a case of Achoso Mina'im. Because here it's not really Achoso Mina'im because the Geras took place after they were born. So they had their own Geras and Kekot Shenola Domi. But add to boot another variable that it's not really Achoso Mina'im, it's only Eshes Achiv through a Maisa Kiddush. Now, the Eshes Achi Aviv is then Mutaros. One second, I must have missed something. Eshes Achi Aviv. Yeah, because she married his uncle. But how is he the uncle? Because he and his father are brothers. But there was no Gerus. So if there's no Gerus, then we don't recognize them as brothers. Ushar kol arayos toros lo. What are you adding? Lasuye Eshes of Ha'av. He's allowed to marry his father's wife, who's not his mother. Normally, the Torah says you're not allowed to marry your father's wife. But here, you're allowed to because your father is a guy, and therefore you have no relationship to your father's wife. Binasa Isha Ubita. Wow, this is pretty wild. He was a guy, and he married two women, a mother and a daughter. That's a mother-in-law. I don't know, again, what I always ask you what the secular law might be in that case. You know, you could ask Dustin Hoffman, maybe, I don't know. But he already graduated probably by now. So we don't know. But the man is, is married to both his mother, the daughter and his mother-in-law. Now he becomes a ger. He cannot remain married to both of them if they underwent gerus together with him, even though technically, according to Torah law, they're not related. But nevertheless, he has to choose one or the other. Kones achas umotzi achas. Okay, we don't know what that means, but he has to marry one of them and leave one of them out. Because if we allow him to remain married, or to marry, I should say, because he needs a new marriage, now that he's Jewish, to marry a woman and a mother, people are going to mistakenly think that you're allowed to marry Isha Bita. Mesa Ishto. So he chose to be married to the daughter. Now, unfortunately, his wife dies. Is he allowed to now marry her mother? Mutter b'chamotz. Again, if I had to quiz you, when does halacha permit you to marry your mother-in-law? That sounds pretty weird. It's bizarre. But the answer is that you were married to her before your gerus. We forced you to divorce her in order to validate one of the two marriages, and you chose to validate the daughter. Now she's gone. You're allowed to marry her mother, which is chamosa. Again, because Gershon is Gary Pikot Shinola. Mesa Ishto Mutter B'Nesue Chamosa. Now the reverse happened. No, that was the case that we discussed. Ika de Tani also. We have another transmission that he's not allowed to marry his mother-in-law after the death of his wife, her daughter. So the Gemara is going to analyze this machlokas. Ktani bias v'yeshes achiv mutter. Right? In other words, if it's his brother, even though it's his brother from the same mother, he's allowed to marry his wife, in other words, his sister-in-law. I love, shouldn't we explain this brisa to be matir ger, to marry the wife of his brother, in the case of the niskva achiv shuger. So again, his brother was Niskayer and then married a woman. And yet the Brisa says that the ger is allowed to marry the wife of his late brother, even though they share the same mother. And the Gemara objects to this. This is something the Gemara is not going to be able to tolerate, because his brother and he share the same mother. Once that happens, and that's called share, we have to be very nervous because they are brother and sister. And here it's the wife of his brother. So once we establish that he and his brother have a kurva by virtue of the fact that they are maternal brothers, then therefore the wife of his maternal brother should be prohibited. Love. The Brisa never intended to be matir a ger to marry the wife of his brother when his brother was a maternal brother. Well, what's the case? The nispa yeshahu ove kochav. The man marries his brother's wife and he's a god. Well, what do I care about? So after his maternal brother married a woman, then he underwent gerus. And this is the case that the Brisa was matir the ger to marry his sister-in-law when he and his brother share the same mother. However, in a case where after the Gerus she was born, and that means that the brother married her after Gerus. That would be awesome. I mean, that's not up for grabs. I mean, don't interpret the Brisa as referring to a case of a man who marries a woman who is married to his brother after the Gerus. That for sure is going to be awesome. But rather, the case is before the Gerus. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ila Meimer." Well, why do I need this din at all? I mean, there's no chiddush in this din. Certainly, a ger is allowed to marry his brother's wife when he's a guy. Mal Tema, I would have thought. Ligs are, we should prohibit a ger to marry the wife of his brother. So again, the Gemara is trying to come up with a convincing argument that maybe we should prohibit this marriage of a ger who marries the wife of his brother, meaning his maternal brother, even though his brother married this woman before his gerus. And we would think that this should be prohibited. So even though his brother married this woman before the gerus, but we should institute a gzera because of the case of his brother marrying her after the gerus. That was the Havamim. So now we get to the Kamashma. Kamashma is that there's no Isser for a ger to marry the wife of his brother if his brother married this woman when she and he were goyim. Omar Mar, I want to see how we're doing on the clock. We don't have that much time. Let's just see. Omar Mar. Again, we're talking about a ger. Nasa Isha Ubita. So if I understand correctly, the case is where as a guy, he married a woman and her mother. Now he underwent gerus. Ones achas umotzi achas. Ulechatchila lo yichnas. So the Gemara raises the obvious objection. Hashta fuki mefik lechatchila miboy. Why do you have to tell me lechatchila lo yichnas? We said if he married her, then we're going to force him to break up the marriage. How much more so that he's not allowed to marry her up front? The Gemara answers, Hasam Kai. I guess Hasam Kai means that we're referring to a different scenario. When it says L'chatchila lo yichnos, it's a different scenario. Hachikam. Omar Hach, the Omar Rabbanon. Ikayim, in those cases where the Rabbanon said that if the ger wants to marry her, or went ahead and marry her, we can be Mekayim the wedding. He doesn't have to divorce her. You're going b'achosome aviv. Right, so again, let's re-emphasize. If you have a kurva from the father, and we're talking about going before gerus, then we don't recognize that that relationship, that kurva. So therefore, if he married Achoso Me'aviv, is Yikayim. Nobody thinks that they are brother and sister. I'm going to read the commentary. It says, Eino tzarch lahotzi kigon b'achoso me'aviv v'zeh hishmiyanu habraisa b'dinim elu heim b'di'eved shim nasa eino tzarch lahotzi l'chatchil lo yichnos. So the case of l'chatchil lo yichnos is the case of achoso me'aviv, which we said that if the relationship is coming from the father, nobody takes that seriously. But the Brisa tells me that even in the case of achoso me'aviv, it's only b'di'eved if they got married. We're not going to break and force the divorce. But if they haven't yet gotten married, he's not allowed to marry achoso me'aviv. That's l'chatchila prohibited. And this leads us to the Brisa of Mesa Ishto in the case of Chamosa. So again, as a guy, he was married to a woman and a mother, and now he became a ger. He's got to divorce one of the two. He went ahead and he divorced his mother-in-law. And then his wife died. Can he marry his mother-in-law? And this we have in Machlokes Kirabi Shmuel. Chada Kirabi Shmuel, one brisa reflects the Shita Rabbi Shmuel. The Chada Kirabi Akiva, the Shita Rabbi Akiva. So we have two brises. One brise says that he's allowed to marry his mother-in-law once his wife dies. And the other brisa reflects the Shita that he's not allowed to marry his mother-in-law even after the death of his wife. Mandi Omar, according to the Mandi Omar, who says you're not allowed to marry. Right? Mandi also, I just want to get to the two dots here, so we start the mission of Elinetta tomorrow. If you have another few minutes, just make it quick. Mandi Osar, you're not allowed to marry the mother of your late wife. That reflects the Shita Rabbi Yishmael. And why does he prohibit it? The Omar Chamoso Liachar Misa, the Isura Kaima, that there's no difference between Chamoso during the life of your wife or after her death. So just like as long as his wife was alive, he could marry her mother, so too, even after his wife is dead, he's not allowed to marry her mother. That's a capital violation. Is also Gabi Ger Gazu Rabbanon, according to Rabbi Yishmael, Chamoso is going to be Asim Rabbanon. Umad Shari, that brisa that says that a ger is allowed to marry the mother-in-law, that's Rabbi Akiva. Why? The Omar, because Rabbi Akiva holds Chamoso Liachar Miksa Kolech Le Isura. There are different levels of an Isur Ereva. There's a mother-in-law during the life of your wife, a daughter, and there's a mother-in-law after the death of your wife. And Rabbi Akiva, as opposed to Rabbi Shmuel, who says the Isura Kaima, he's of the opinion that Nechlasha Isur. It's not the same Isur with all its severity of like a Chiv Sreifa. None of that applies once his wife is gone. It's reminiscent of a Chos Ishno, but there again, it's a head to Gomer. Here we're saying it's a lower echelon Isur, and therefore Gabi Ger lo gozu beirabanan. We could be matir a ger to marry the mother of his wife, because even as a Yisrael, the din of Chamoso after this each toe would go down and it's kal, and therefore the Rabbanan were not machmir in the case of a ger. So that leads us to the Mishnah here on the bottom of Sadi Chesam and Beis. If you don't mind making a note of it, don't rely on me if you can, because I'm going to ask you. Not have a pencil.
Yes, thanks.
Okay.
Here.
You should have a pencil somewhere in this mess. All right. So we're going to start B'li Neder tomorrow, regular time, with this Mishnah here on Sadi Chesam and Beis at the bottom. So have a great day. Thank you so much.